The coffee at Hargrove Capital tastes like burnt ambition and recycled air, and I've been drinking it every morning for 2 years without complaint. That's the thing about working for Callum Hargrove. You learn very quickly which battles are worth fighting, and complaining about office coffee is not one of them. I arrive at 7:15 every morning, 45 minutes before anyone else on the 31st floor, because that's the window where the building feels like mine. The downtown Toronto skyline sits gray and quiet through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Lake Ontario a flat silver line in the distance. And for those 45 minutes I can think clearly before the day becomes about managing everyone else's thinking. My desk sits between the elevator bank and Callum's corner office, positioned so nothing reaches him without going through me first. That's not a metaphor. That's the literal architecture of my job. I'm his senior executive assistant, which means I know his coffee order, his allergy to shellfish, his standing lunch reservation at a restaurant on King Street West that doesn't take bookings for anyone else, and the names of the 3 people in this city whose calls he will interrupt any meeting to take. I know the difference between his silences, the one that means he's processing, the one that means he's already decided and is waiting for you to catch up, and the one that means someone has made a serious mistake and should start drafting their resignation letter. 2 years. 700 and some odd days of arriving before the sun properly clears the lake, of building a calendar that looks straightforward on the surface and is in reality a game of 3-dimensional chess, of making myself precisely visible enough to be useful and precisely invisible enough to be trusted. I'd mastered that balance, or I thought I had, until the morning of the bouquet. I didn't notice it at first. I was reconciling a discrepancy in the quarterly compliance filings, my second coffee already cold beside me, when Jess from reception appeared at the edge of my desk, with the expression of someone delivering either very good or very complicated news. "These came for you," she said. "Like, for you, not for the office." The arrangement was enormous. White peonies and deep burgundy dahlias, wrapped in craft paper, tied with a satin ribbon the color of a stormy sky. The kind of thing that costs $300 at the boutique florist on Cumberland Street. The kind of thing someone sends when they want to be noticing you. There was no card. I stared at it for a long moment, genuinely baffled, and then became aware that Callum's office door, which had been closed for a morning call, had gone quiet. His voice came through the intercom the way it always does when he's about to make my morning more complicated. "The Linden Group term sheet. Where are we? Revised version is on your desk, tabbed in blue." I flagged the 3 clauses that conflict with the Ontario Securities Commission disclosure requirements you mentioned last week. A pause. Then, "You remembered that conversation." "I remember all our conversations, Mr. Hargrove. That's what you pay me for." Something that might have been amusement moved through the speaker. "Come in, please." I gathered my notes and went in. His office is always slightly cooler than the rest of the floor, which I've come to think is intentional. A subtle way of keeping meetings from running long. Callum stood with his back to me, looking out at the city, his dark suit the same charcoal as the clouds building over the lake. He's tall in a way that takes up space without effort, and he cuts his hair just slightly too short for the Bay Street standard, which I've always found interesting. A small, deliberate departure from the uniform. "The flagged clauses," he said, without turning. "Walk me through your thinking." This was a test. He does this regularly, questions decisions I've already made correctly, watching to see whether I'll doubt myself or hold my position. I learned to hold my position somewhere around month 4. Clause 12 assumes that the Linden Group qualifies as a non-reporting issuer under the OSC framework, but based on the revenue thresholds in their last fiscal year, they crossed the threshold in Q3. If that's not corrected before the term sheet is finalized, we're looking at a material disclosure gap that could expose the deal to regulatory review, or worse, unwinding post-close. He turned to face me. His eyes are a particular shade of gray-green that I had once, in a moment of weakness, described to my friend Paige as unfairly specific. He held my gaze in that way he has, not aggressive, just completely without deflection. Define worse in this context: OS investigation, deal suspension, potential personal liability for the officers who signed off. I'd assume we prefer to avoid all 3. Something shifted in his face, not quite a smile, but the architecture of one. Correct. Have the revised language ready for the Linden Group's council by 2 o'clock. He paused. Already drafted. Green tab in the same folder. The almost smile reached his eyes. Efficient as always. I turned to leave. The flowers, he said, stopping me at the door. His voice had gone carefully neutral. The ones at reception, they're addressed to you. I turned back. I'm not expecting anything. White peonies. Quite elaborate. He looked at the middle distance rather than at me. An admirer, perhaps. Heat moved up the back of my neck. If so, they're confused. I don't really have those. Everyone has admirers, Ren. He used my first name so rarely that it landed differently every time. Some are simply quieter about it than others. I didn't have an answer for that, so I went back to my desk. I put the flowers in the corner where I couldn't see them directly and tried to focus on the quarterly filings. It worked for about 20 minutes. Paige texted me at 11:30. My cousin works in your building lobby. She says they're flowers. Wusho are they from? I typed back. I have no idea. No card. She replied, Ren, do you think it's… I locked my phone before she could finish that sentence. The afternoon was ordinary in the way that afternoons at Hargrove Capital are ordinary. 3 calls to reschedule. A minor crisis with a data room access link that I resolved by calling the third-party provider directly and refusing to be transferred, a 12-minute delay with a courier that I preemptively addressed before Callum had to know about it. The kind of firefighting that happens every day and gets filed under invisible labor. It wasn't until I was shutting down my computer at 5:40 that Marcus, head of security, appeared beside my desk with the expression he wears when he's been given instructions he doesn't entirely agree with. Mrs. Callahan, my full surname, I noticed that. Mr. Hargrove has asked that the floral arrangement be forwarded to your home address. I'll arrange delivery to your vehicle. That's not necessary, they're fine at reception. Jess said the lobby could use some color. Mr. Hargrove was specific. Marcus's face didn't move. He'd like them removed from the building. Something about his tone told me this was not a suggestion. I nodded slowly and gathered my things. When I reached the lobby, the flowers were already waiting by the security desk, rewrapped neatly in fresh paper. And then the elevator opened, and Callum stepped out, which was unusual. He typically leaves through the private parking level and crossed directly toward the bouquet with a look carved from something cold. Get rid of them, he said quietly, not loud. He didn't need volume. The security guard on duty straightened immediately. Sir, they're addressed to. I'm aware. He didn't raise his voice. Get rid of them. Something flooded through me then. Not quite anger, not quite embarrassment. Something with teeth. I set my bag down on the security desk very deliberately. With respect, Miss Hargrove. I kept my voice level. They're mine. If they're going anywhere, I'll make that decision. He turned to face me. I had worked for this man for 2 years, had seen him negotiate across a boardroom table, with the composure of someone playing a game 3 moves ahead, had seen him face a securities review with less apparent stress than most people bring to a dentist appointment. I had never seen him look the way he looked at me in that moment, like something in him had slipped. You want to keep a gift from someone who didn't bother to leave a name. I want to make my own decisions about what I keep. I held his gaze, and I'd like to know why it matters to you. The lobby was very quiet. Someone near the elevators found something urgent on their phone. Callum closed the distance between us in 3 steps. He's taller than me by enough that I had to my chin up slightly, and this close I could smell the faint cedar of his jacket and something underneath it that I absolutely was not cataloging. You work for me, he said. His voice had dropped to something below a register I'd heard before. What happens to you in this building is my concern. Someone who won't leave a name with an arrangement that size is either careless or deliberate, and neither sits well from a security standpoint. This isn't about security. The words left my mouth before I had finished deciding to say them, and we both know it. His jaw tightened. For one specific second, I thought he was going to say something real. Instead, he stepped back, his expression closing the way a door closes when someone has decided the conversation is over. Marcus, have the flowers delivered to Miss Callahan's address and run a background check on the sender. I want a name before morning. He walked back to the elevator, his footsteps even on the marble, and was gone. Marcus gathered the bouquet with careful hands. I caught his eye. Is he always like that? I said quietly. Like what? He didn't look up, but after a moment, "You should see him on a bad day." This was restrained. I live in a one-bedroom in the annex, close enough to the subway that I can hear the distant rattle of the Bloor line on quiet nights. The apartment is small and full of books I haven't had time to read since I took the Hargrove job, and the flowers looked absurd on my kitchen counter. Something from another tax bracket colonizing my IKEA furniture. The card was tucked between two stems. I'd missed it in the lobby. The handwriting was clean, deliberate. For the woman who makes every room better simply by being in it. I've been watching you for some time. It's time you knew, D. A chill moved through me that had nothing to do with my window being open. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. "I hope the peonies found you well. I've been admiring you for months, and I think it's past time for dinner. Saturday. I'll send a car. I'd very much like to talk." I stared at the message for a long time. The phrasing was careful, confident in a way that had nothing to do with charm and everything to do with someone who was used to outcomes going their way. My phone rang before I had decided what to do. Callum. Private line, the one he'd given me the first week of the job and told me was for genuine emergencies only. "Did you receive anything else?" No preamble. A text, signed D. "Whoever it is says they've been watching me for months." A pause that was not like his processing pause. "Forward it to me, don't respond, don't delete." Another pause. "And Ren, lock your door, check the windows. I'm sending Marcus to do a sweep of your building." "Callum, it's necessary, do as I say." He hung up. I forwarded the message and went to check my door, which was already locked. I stood in my kitchen with the flowers filling the air with their heavy sweetness, and understood something that hadn't fully landed until this moment. Whoever D was, this was not a crush. This was calculated. The phrasing, the timing, the deliberate anonymity. These were not the moves of someone acting on impulse. These were someone who had done their homework. I was the homework. A second text arrived. "Don't worry about the other man watching you from a distance. He's not as subtle as he thinks. Saturday. I'll be in touch." I read it twice. "The other man watching you from a distance." I called Callum back. "Did you read what I forwarded?" "Yes." His voice was very controlled. "He knows you've been watching him." Silence. Then, "Stay inside. I'll explain everything in the morning. Don't go to the office. I'll come to you. I'll be at my desk at 7:15 like always." Ren, a sound I hadn't heard from him before. "For once in your life, please just 7:15, Mr. Hargrove." I hung up, then immediately felt slightly insane for being defiant about my commute while receiving anonymous texts from someone who'd been surveilling me. But it felt important. It felt like the one thing I could control. The flowers watched me from the counter. I moved them to the bathroom. In the morning, Marcus met me in the lobby of Hargrove Capital before I reached the elevator. 32nd floor boardroom, he said. Not his office. I had been in the private boardroom twice in 2 years. It was where Callum held conversations that required both soundproofing and the ability to look at the lake while choosing his words carefully. When I entered, he was standing at the window, hands clasped behind his back, and there was a folder on the table thick enough to be a manuscript. "Close the door," he said without turning. I did. The latch sounded deliberate. The flowers were sent by Desmond Fairweather. He turned to face me, and the shadows under his eyes told me he hadn't slept. "Does that name mean anything to you?" No, his family runs Fairweather Logistics. Freight and supply chain, primarily Ontario and Quebec, federally regulated, but with a significant amount of discretionary contracting that runs through government channels. He moved to the table, opening the folder. 3 years ago, Fairweather's company was in acquisition talks with one of our portfolio companies. The deal fell apart badly. Desmond's father, Gordon Fairweather, blamed me personally, and the son is sending me flowers because he's been watching you for approximately 5 months. Callum spread photographs across the table. He was at the same coffee shop on Queen West on Tuesday mornings for 7 consecutive weeks. He was at the Harborfront Center. The same evening, you volunteered for the literacy fundraiser in October. He attended a professional development seminar at Morris last month, the same one you registered for. My stomach dropped slowly, like an elevator losing tension. "How do you know all of this?" He looked at me steadily. "Because I noticed him at a gala in September. He was asking your colleagues about you, too specifically, so I started paying attention. You've been monitoring him." I've been monitoring the situation, a distinction he clearly considered meaningful. There's a difference between surveillance and due diligence, and I was erring toward the latter because I didn't want to alarm you without cause, and now you have cause. The text message last night suggests he knows he's being watched, which means he's also been watching me watching him. Callum's expression was very careful. He's not careless, he's escalating deliberately. Understanding moved through me in pieces. He wants access to your operations through me, not just information, leverage. If he can make me complicit in something, you lose the ability to use me as a witness, Callum said. Yes, that's what the text was. He was telling you I'm not what I appear to be, trying to introduce doubt. He paused. And then he'll offer you money to share information about our client roster, our deal flow, our government contacts. He needs those relationships to rebuild what his father lost 3 years ago. The clarity of it was almost architectural. What do you want me to do? He held my gaze for a long moment. I want you to agree to have dinner with him. I set down the folder I'd been holding. I'm sorry. With appropriate protection. Wired, monitored. Angelo, my counterpart at the legal firm we use for sensitive matters, has experience with exactly this kind of situation. You'd go in with full preparation, a clear objective, and an exit protocol. His voice was even. You let Fairweather believe you're genuinely considering his offer. You extract enough detail to document his intentions, and then we end it. You want me to run a sting operation at a dinner. I want you to help me neutralize a threat before it escalates into something that requires less elegant solutions. A pause. I can find another way to handle this. I want to be clear about that. A more permanent professional way. But it would involve destroying what's left of his family's business entirely, and that has collateral damage I'd prefer to avoid. The unspoken implication hung in the air between us. He had options. He preferred the clean one, and the clean one required me. If I do this, I said, I have conditions. He looked at me with something I hadn't seen before. Not surprise exactly. More like recognition of an expected move from an unexpected direction. Name them. You tell me everything. Not the edited version. Not the need to know. If I'm walking into that dinner, I need to understand exactly what I'm walking into and why. I held his gaze. And after this is over, we have a real conversation. About what you just said. About the monitoring. About whatever this is. I gestured at the space between us in a way that could have referred to the situation or to something considerably larger. He was quiet for long enough that I counted my own heartbeats. Agreed, he said, to both. The next 3 days were unlike any 3 days of the job before. I learned things in a conference room on the 32nd floor that the previous version of me, the one who drank terrible coffee and kept her head down and prided herself on professional discretion, would have found incomprehensible. I learned about the Fairweather acquisition collapse, about Gordon Fairweather's subsequent campaign to discredit Hargrove Capital with specific federal contacts, about the shipping contracts that Desmond had inherited, along with his father's grievances. Callum was present for most of it. He sat across the table from me with a yellow legal pad and walked me through everything with the same methodical patience he brought to a complex term sheet. He didn't deflect. He didn't minimize. When I asked hard questions, he answered them, including the ones about decisions he'd made, 3 years ago, that he would make again. You froze Gordon Fairweather out of a deal he needed to survive, I said, on the second evening, when everyone else had gone home, and we were alone in the conference room with cold takeout containers between us. I withdrew from a deal I'd lost confidence in for documented reasons. He met my eyes. His company had been misrepresenting its federal contract history in the disclosure documents. I caught it in due diligence. I had 2 options, proceed anyway, or pull out and document why. I documented why, and when it collapsed, he blamed you. When it collapsed, he needed someone to blame who wasn't a mirror. Something moved across his face, not bitterness, exactly. Something older than that. I don't regret the decision. I regret that his son is now using you to try to relitigate it. I looked at him for a moment. What happened to Gordon Fairweather? He's still operating, smaller, primarily Quebec freight. He spent 18 months rebuilding and mostly managed it. A pause. Desmond watched his father rebuild from nothing and decided there was a debt outstanding. That's more dangerous than ambition. Grief dressed up as strategy. That's a generous reading of someone who's been following me for 5 months. I'm not generous about him. I'm accurate about his motivation. His eyes held mine. There's a difference. On the 3rd evening after Marcus had gone through exit protocols with me for the 4th time, Callum found me alone in the conference room, studying contact photographs of Desmond Fairweather. "You don't have to do this," he said from the doorway. "You said that yesterday. I mean it differently today." He came in and closed the door. "Yesterday I was managing my liability. Tonight He stopped. "Tonight I don't want you to do this, Ren. There's a difference." I looked at him across the table. "Tell me why." The silence had a particular weight. He moved to stand at the window, looking out at the city in the dark. 3 years ago, he said, I made a difficult professional decision alone, with information no one else had, and it cost someone significantly. I don't second-guess the decision. But I've spent 3 years since then, building something I could believe in. Something with rules. He turned from the window. "You're part of what makes it worth believing in." I didn't say anything. "You arrived at your desk 7:15 every morning, and for the first 20 minutes of the day, before the calls started, you had already identified 3 problems I hadn't noticed yet." His voice was very controlled. "You push back on me when I'm wrong, which almost no one does, and you're right approximately 90% of the time, which is infuriating in the best possible way. You make terrible coffee last 30 minutes longer than it should, because you're too absorbed in whatever you're working on to notice it's gone cold." A pause. "And somewhere in the last 2 years, the idea of you being in a room with someone who sees you as a tool became genuinely intolerable to me." The words sat between us. "That sounds like it was hard to say," I said. "It was." No deflection. Not even a qualifier, just the admission, plain and clear. I crossed to him. And then I kissed him, which was not part of any protocol I'd been briefed on, and which felt like the most sensible thing I'd done, in several weeks. He was still for 1/2 second, and then his hands came up to hold my face. Careful, like something he'd wanted to do for a long time, and was terrified of getting wrong, and he kissed me back with 2 years of discipline finally giving way. When we broke apart, neither of us spoke immediately. "That was highly inadvisable," he said, his voice not quite steady. "I know. There are power dynamics here that—" "I know, Callum." A sound between an exhale and something more wrecked. "I've been your employer for 2 years, and in approximately 72 hours, depending on how dinner with Desmond Fairweather goes, that dynamic is going to change significantly either way." I held his gaze. "So I'd rather make this decision now, with full information, than pretend it isn't happening." He looked at me for a long time. "You're the most difficult person I have ever employed, you've told me. I have it on a sticky note somewhere." His hands were still framing my face. He pressed his forehead to mine, and neither of us moved. "Dinner with Fairweather," he said. "Then we talk, properly." Everything, I agreed. "And Ren, if at any point something feels wrong, you signal Marcus immediately. No being brave about it. No deciding you can manage it alone." "I promise." He kissed me once more, briefly, like a decision being confirmed. Then he stepped back, and we were once again 2 people with a plan and a deadline, and roughly 72 hours until everything changed. I wore a forest green dress I owned myself, which felt important. Marcus was in a vehicle 2 cars behind the cab. The restaurant Desmond had chosen was on Yorkville, the kind of place that bills itself as a private dining experience and considers a reservation a formality only relevant to people without the right last name. Desmond Fairweather was already seated when I arrived, and I understood immediately what Callum had been working against. He was handsome in a deliberate, managed way. Good suit, easy manner, the kind of attractiveness that announces itself without appearing to try. He stood as I approached. "Ren." My name in his mouth felt presumptuous, like borrowed furniture. "Thank you for coming." I was afraid my approach might have been too bold. It was certainly direct. I took my seat. "I'm still deciding how I feel about it." "That's fair." He smiled. "Practiced. Can I say that you're even more striking in person than you are from a distance?" I let that land without reacting to it. "You can say a lot of things, Desmond. I'm more interested in the ones that are true." He laughed. A real one, apparently surprised. "Direct. Callum Hargrove's influence, I assume. My own influence, actually." I accepted the menu. "He tends toward understatement." "Does he?" Desmond studied me over his water glass. Tell me, do you enjoy working for him, or is it simply the most viable option you've found? The first probe. Right on schedule. I thought of Callum's instructions, curious but measured, not defensive. He's demanding and occasionally impossible, and I learn something every week that I didn't know before. That's more than most jobs offer. Learning is valuable, Desmond agreed. But so is being properly recognized, compensated, seen. He leaned forward slightly. From where I sit, someone with your capability and your access should be running her own operation, not managing someone else's calendar. That's a generous reframing of my job's description. It's an accurate one. You're not just an assistant, Ren. You're the center of his entire operation. Every deal that crosses his desk passes through you first. Every relationship he maintains you help sustain. He paused as the server arrived. That's a significant amount of institutional knowledge. It should be compensated accordingly. After the server left, I held Desmond's gaze. You seem very interested in what crosses his desk. I'm interested in you. The desk comes with you. Most people would find that a deterrent. I find it an opportunity. His tone remained light, but I heard the calculation now, running just under the surface like a current. My family's company had a significant relationship with Hargrove Capital once. It ended badly, through no fault of our own. I've spent 3 years trying to understand how to rebuild those bridges, or whether it's even worth the effort. He picked up his wine glass. You could help me answer that question. By telling you about his operations, by helping me understand whether the man is trustworthy, whether his word means something, whether the professional decision that damaged my father's company 3 years ago was principled or predatory. He kept his voice very reasonable. You're in a position to know. That information has significant value to me, and I would make that clear in a very concrete way. How concrete? $75,000 to start. He said it flatly, like a line item, for an honest assessment of Callum Hargrove's character and operating practices. A second payment upon completion, contingent on the depth of what you share. There it was, not even slightly veiled in the end. $150,000 for what he was calling an honest assessment, and what was, in fact, corporate espionage served over $40 appetizers. I set down my fork. That's a significant offer, I said carefully. You're a significant person. He held my gaze. Think about what that kind of capital means for someone at your stage. Independence, your own firm, a clean exit from a world that takes your loyalty for granted and offers you a salary in return. He paused. I'm offering something better. I'll need time to think about it. Of course. Satisfied. Already counting something he hadn't won. Take all the time you need. I'm a patient man. The rest of dinner was surface-level cordial. Desmond charming and watchful, me curious enough to extract detail without triggering alarm. By dessert, I had enough. The full scope of what he wanted. Callum's government contacts, specific deal timelines, the identity of a confidential informant who'd provided information to Hargrove Capital during the Fairweather due diligence 3 years ago. That last one was the one that mattered. That was what this entire approach had been building toward. In the cab home, I kept my expression neutral for the driver's benefit and sent Callum a single text. It was the informant all along. He wants the name. Full details when I'm home. He called within seconds. Are you all right? Fine. He was very polished about it, everything on record. A long exhale. You were extraordinary, I was doing my job. I paused. A different version of it than usual. We need to talk about what comes next. We do, I agreed, tomorrow. Tonight. His voice was very quiet. I've been sitting in a car 3 blocks from that restaurant for the last 2 hours, and I would like to see you tonight, please. I smiled in the dark of the cab, despite everything. That was an unusually direct sentence from you. I'm taking your lead. The next morning, Callum and I sat across from each other in his office, door closed for the first time in 2 years, for a non-meeting reason, and made a plan that did not involve anyone getting professionally destroyed. We brought what we had to a contact at the Competition Bureau. Desmond's offer, recorded in full, combined with documentation of the surveillance, the anonymous texts, and the specific ask for a confidential informant's identity, which crossed several legal lines simultaneously. The Bureau had been looking for a reason to examine Fairweather Logistics' federal contracting history for 2 years. We handed them one. Desmond was formally investigated 4 weeks later. The charges were multiple: The outcome was not a conviction, but it was thorough enough, and public enough, that any attempt to continue his approach to Callum, or to me, would have attracted immediate scrutiny from people with significantly more authority than either of us. "You could have just destroyed his company," I said to Callum, the evening after the referral was filed. We were in his office, the city dark below us, his jacket over the back of his chair in a way that suggested the day had been long and was finally over. Frozen him out of every relationship he has. That would have been faster, he agreed. Not better. He looked at his desk. His father made bad decisions out of desperation. Desmond made worse ones out of grief. Neither of those things justifies what he did, but they explain it. And a man who's been stopped by a process has a chance to recalibrate. A man who's been destroyed doesn't. I looked at him for a moment. That's a surprisingly considered position from someone whose company was the target. I had a long time to think in that car 3 blocks away, a slight, exhausted version of the almost smile, about a lot of things. I moved to stand beside him at the window. Below us, King Street was bright with the tail end of the evening rush, the city doing what cities do. "You said we'd talk," I said. "Properly, I did. So talk." He was quiet for a moment, then he turned to face me, and there was something in his expression I recognized from the conference room 3 days earlier. The look of someone who has decided to stop editing themselves. "I've been managing this, whatever this is, for about 18 months. Telling myself that professional boundaries existed for good reasons, that the power dynamic made any acknowledgement inappropriate, that I was protecting you by not saying anything." He looked at me steadily. "I was also protecting myself, which is less defensible. I know. I'm not an easy person to be with, Ren. I want to be honest about that from the beginning and not qualify it away later. I work too much. I am constitutionally incapable of letting a problem sit unsolved, which means I sometimes try to solve problems that aren't mine to solve, including people." He paused. "I tried to manage the Fairweather situation without telling you for 2 weeks because I thought I could resolve it before it touched you. That was wrong. It was. I won't do it again. I know you'll try not to," I said. "And when you do, I'll tell you. That's what this is, right? You're not hiring me to manage your life anymore. You're asking me to be in it." Something in him settled. "Yes. That's exactly what I'm asking." I leaned against the window beside him. "I have conditions. I assumed you would. I'm not going to be your assistant anymore. I've been thinking about starting my own practice, regulatory consulting, which God knows this city needs. You can be my first client if you want, but strictly professional, strictly my terms, with a proper contract." I held his gaze. "I need to be someone separate from you in order to be with you. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense. And we tell people, we don't manage a private arrangement while presenting something different to the world. That's not something I'll do," agreed. "And if a threat appears, you tell me immediately. Not after 2 weeks. Not after you've decided it's manageable. The moment it exists." He held all of keys. "Agreed. All of it." A pause. "Do you have a 4th condition? I want actual good coffee in the office. The stuff we've been drinking for 2 years is criminal." A real laugh escaped him. Sudden, unguarded. The first I'd heard from him in 2 years of watching for it. He caught my hand and held it. "Done," he said. "All of it. Done." 8 months later, I stood in a rental hall in the Distillery District, which my friend Paige had decorated with the passionate overinvestment of someone who had been waiting for this particular event for years. My parents were there, and Callum's older brother and Marcus, who smiled twice in one evening, which I think constituted a record. The officiant was a woman I'd found through a community legal clinic I'd begun working with through my consulting practice, which had launched 6 months prior, and had, against all sensible expectation, immediately attracted 3 significant clients. Callum and I had done the legal paperwork 6 weeks earlier, quietly, at a registry office on Spadina, because neither of us needed ceremony to know the thing was real. The Distillery District evening was for everyone else. The people who had watched us arrive separately at professional events for 2 years and wondered, and who deserved to see the answer stated clearly. When he slid the ring onto my finger, a plain band with a single round stone, clean and specific exactly like him, he said, "You make me better at the parts of myself I'm trying to keep. I don't take that lightly," I said. "You're still going to be impossible sometimes." Constantly, he agreed. Good. I like knowing what I'm getting. He kissed me in front of 60 people, and Paige cried loudly enough that several strangers looked over. Later, we stood on the narrow balcony of the hall, looking out at the lit cobblestones of the district below, his arm around me, my head resting against his shoulder, the city doing what it always does, moving, indifferent, continuous. Happy? He asked. Terrified and happy, I said. Is that allowed? It's realistic. He pressed a kiss to my temple, which I've always found more reassuring than the alternative. I thought about Jess at reception handing me a bouquet of white peonies with the expression of someone delivering complicated news. About the cold lobby and the flowers I hadn't ordered, and a man I worked for using the word admirer, in a tone he'd clearly spent effort making neutral, about all the small recalibrations that had been happening for 2 years, in the space between professional and something else, in the silence between sentences, in the way he said my first name so rarely that it landed differently every single time. I thought about how nothing about this had been simple, or safe, or straightforwardly wise, and how I had chosen it anyway, with full information, standing in it with both feet. The city moved below us. The lake was invisible but present, the way it always is in Toronto, felt rather than seen, a dark horizon beyond the lights. What comes next? I said. His arm tightened around me. Everything, he said, in whatever order it arrives. That was enough. That was exactly enough.